Hello, and welcome back to Single and Strong, a podcast dedicated to exploring the untold stories of single parents from the South Asian community. I'm your host, Annabelle Ariyanayagam, and today we're shifting the narrative as we focus on the experiences of South Asian single dads in the UK. We often hear about the struggles of South Asian mothers, but there are also powerful untold stories of single fathers. And today we're speaking with Sukhy, a South Asian single dad who has faced challenges, defied expectations, and built a life for his family with resilience and strength. Sukhy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure to have you. But let's jump right in. You are a South Asian single father in the UK, and it's not really a story that is voiced in the media, in pop culture, in films very
hmm
often. Tell me about your journey.
Um, it's been now what 11 years? Yeah, 11 years, literally, probably to this day, actually, since sort of technically separated, and then probably 10 years since been divorced. Yeah, and I think initially, when you go through it, I think probably like most relationships, whether it's South Asian or the wider Caucasian population, but I think you go through the whole sort of the whole hell of separation, divorce, the impact it has on your children. But I think with myself, it was very much sort of when it sort of initially happened, it was a shock. My life literally turned upside down within the space of minutes. But you know, um, I think very quickly the one thing that I focused on was the impact it would have on my children. I have two boys, and I think for me it was really much about okay to get through it. Um, but to do it in a manner where it had the least impact on them. Because no matter what we say, I think separation, divorce, it does impact on children no matter what. Even if it goes as smooth as possible, it does impact on them.
Mhm.
And it was sort of to lessen the impact on them, and then also to sort of try and maintain my own health and well-being. And so, yeah, so I think you go through that initial very rocky, very sort of place which feels like it's sort of the worst thing in the world, but then I think a few years later, yeah, you sort of you come to some level of standardization and touch wood. Yeah, I look back now and say, yeah, it's something I went through. Life since then has improved significantly, and I have a great relationship with my boys, who are now adults with themselves, and also I actually have a good relationship with my ex-wife. And we will now sort of do things collectively when it comes to our children, and we respect each other. So we've been through all the ups and downs, and so we have we've plateaued into an area where we sort of have an established, respectful relationship between us both for the sake of
That,
our kids.
yeah, no, that's really good to hear that you've managed to find that coexistence. But tell me, what impact did the divorce have on your boys?
Um, I think probably like with most children, I think my children at the time were 11 and 7. Um, And so, it impacts on their education. It impacts on suddenly dad's there 1 minute, and next minute he's not. You know, and so their whole sort of will changes. So I think as much as we think it doesn't, it does. And then it's. I think also that whole societal thing has an impact on
Mhm.
children. And again, whether we like to admit it or not, it does. But I think it was, you know, my job was to try and support them through it, and like they them now as a young man getting on with their lives, and and they've both been to my youngest is still at university, eldest has finished university, he works. So on that basis, it's like, yeah, things have gone, touch wood, as good as they could have gone.
Mhm.
But yeah, initially I think it does have an impact on them, and as a father figure, you're not there constantly. So even though my boys don't live far from me, but I'm not there 24/7 as you normally would be,
Mhm.
and so you've got to sort of make sure that you um, invest that time with them as well. to make sure that you are there, that you're part of their lives, even though you're not part of it um, on a ongoing basis,
Yeah,
on a
that must
daily.
have been, yeah, it must have been difficult. I mean, how did you find the transition from being in that family unit to then being a single parent and not, I mean, even the physical, not living in the home with them must have been hard for
Yeah,
you.
yeah. Initially, it is. It's very difficult, and being away from your children, I didn't see my boys for the first 5 weeks, and that was like it was soul destroying. But unfortunately, that there is a legal system in this country, which I think people who are in it will admit it doesn't always favour the males. However, separations happen, but that is how the legal system's set up, and you have to sort of respect it and follow it. And so, yeah, so it was very difficult initially. Yeah,
What experience did you have during that divorce? And you say the legal system doesn't favor fathers. Is there a story to that? What happened in your case?
I think I think in just general, in that I was always sort of the main earner in the family, and
Hmm.
unless you work in the legal system, um, I never really had any engagement with the legal or the law. Um, but when you sort of have to get involved in it, when you're going through these procedures, um, you learn very quickly that actually, even though you were the main breadwinner and everything that's the main contributor to where the boys live, the home, the cost of living, the bills, etc. But when it comes to a separation or divorce, the legal system, actually none of that's taken into account. It's literally, and then you learn very quickly actually, well, that's not very like fair as such, and so it can be a bit of a bitter pill to swallow. But I know I've heard it on the other side where I know ladies who've gone through the procedure and they've been hard done by. So I think it's all about generally the person who's, let's say, instigating it,
Hmm.
because they've usually instigated it based on that they're prepared, whereas you're completely naive to it, and so you have to sort of play catch up.
Hmm.
And for some people, it can be a massively stressful time. When they go through these processes, because suddenly people lose their home, lose their well being. A lot of men sometimes don't have a place to stay, etc. So and it and these things don't happen overnight. They take months to sort of, or even longer, to sort themselves out, and that can
Hmm.
be quite detrimental. But like I said, it, I think, yeah, mainly men suffer from this, but at the same time, I do know also where females who've gone through the same, and they've been affected as well
Yeah,
in
it is
that
a
way.
really difficult process. But how did you and the mother of your children find the harmony? What system did you create to figure out that co-parenting? And how long did it take to find that harmony?
Um, I think initially, yeah, when you're going through the whole separation, when you're going through the whole divorce process, um, then there is really no harmony. You literally, somebody that you spent 15 years of your life with, suddenly, they can become literally your biggest enemy overnight. And I think the system makes that happen. And I think the legal system is probably to blame for that, because they make the individual say, you're no longer, you know, they sort of they push the niceties aside. That you can't be nice to that person. You look at them as, I think they make you sort of treat each other as enemies. And so yeah, so there was all of that. We went through it, and it probably took, I'd say, best part of sort of between sort of 3 to 4 years, where that we sort of developed some level of harmony. I mean, there were still obviously little ups and downs here, but we did at that point. I think once you've gone through the whole process, the financial situation, and I think until you feel that you've sort of settled and there's some normality to life, because I think that's the thing you crave, is normality, which gets taken away. And I think how we did it was I think initially, yeah, I think for me it was very much that when you do sort of bicker, you quarrel, you say things about each other. Who does it ultimately hurt? It hurts your children. It doesn't hurt anyone else. And I think you have a lot of third parties that I think can add fuel to the fire. Whereas I think if the two individuals are left to their own, they can probably sort it out much better themselves.
Hmm.
And I think once we established that, and then, like I said, my main focus was sort of, I got to a point where I thought, you know what, this really is of no value because all it does is it just hurts my children. And so then I sort of actively tried to sort of build bridges. And I think so did their mother on the other side. And I think between us two, without then the interference of third parties, we sort of came to a relationship which works for us both.
Hmm.
And now we sort of, it's completely fine. We have no issues now.
Well, you talk about these kind of third parties fueling this fire of, I mean, dare I say toxicity, but just negativity and a bad situation. What things do you wish you had at the time during that process, or what things did you have at the time which would have helped to put out the fire, and eventually did create the harmony?
I think as men, I think as and probably most men will agree with this, is I think um, men are sort of left to their own devices. Even though I've got a very good, very strong circle of friends. Few I keep sort of small but very close people. But men sort of then don't tend to sort of get involved in each other's personal issues. Whereas I think females will actively support friends, siblings, and as a male, you are sort of left to your own devices as much, and so it can become quite a lonely place. And so I think that's the big challenge. And but then again, sometimes having people around you, it all depends on the advice you're getting. Is it constructive advice, or is it like you said? Is it just pure toxic advice?
Mm.
And so I think a lot of it can depend on the people around you in terms of um, that can really help to, or that can influence the outcome of these things. And I think in a way we were lucky in that, yeah, it got to a point where my ex-wife sort of stepped away from certain individuals, and then between the two of us, we were able to constructively come to a plateau, which we really focused on. What's best for our boys. It wasn't about us two; it was really about them, and that seems to have worked.
Hmm. Yeah, so it's like having the right support system and the right people around you to advise, because I can imagine it can feel you can feel very lost in that space because
Yeah.
it's complete unknown, it's massive change. So yeah, you definitely want the right kind of people around you. Um, Moving on to the fatherhood aspect of this and the idea of being a good father, um, it's definitely kind of defined and seen differently in different traditions and cultures. Did
Yeah.
you at all, whilst raising your boys, feel any pressure to live up to traditional South Asian expectations of masculinity and fatherhood?
Um, no, not really. I mean, I've always been quite close with my boys, and I think particularly more when we did separate and then divorce. And I think with my two boys, they're both very different, but no, I think it was just about really. I think depending on how you are yourself. I mean, I like to look at myself as being I'm quite modern, I'm quite forward thinking, but I do hold my sort of cultural values very close to my heart, and that's something that I think I try to sort of embed into my boys as much as I could, and I think ultimately whether they take it on was up to them, but ultimately I think it's about sort of ingraining the right values and morals into them as human beings. And I think I've between me and their mom, I think we've managed to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And like now, if there's an issue, yeah, I get a phone call and come on, this has happened, we need to sort it out. And so we're able to sort of tackle them together, which, as that is much more effective than sort of one good cop, bad cop. Because I think initially, yeah, there was a lot of that initially in the separation and divorce. But yeah, I think as two individuals, we've been quite lucky in that they're very grounded, sound, level-headed boys, and I think yeah, more than I think it's probably more. Even though I think obviously divorce separation is unfortunately significantly more common now in the South Asian community, but I think you'll still find pockets of people or cohorts that still look at it as a bit of a black mark, and it's sort of making sure that your children aren't affected by that, because as much as things have changed, the society that we live in, but there are still pockets of individuals who will still frown at such situations,
Mm.
and you still see in society where people who are clearly in unhappy situations are in them, simply they just keep the peace for the sake of you know staying together, for the sake of their what they feel is them maintaining their children's happiness, but that's not always the case.
What
Yeah,
stigma do you feel is
sure.
in the
So
community?
for me, yeah, there is still stigma. It's reduced significantly, but there is still stigma towards whether it's Asian single dads or single moms. Um, and I think there's still a stigma. I think against people who've been married and divorced. They may not have kids, but there's still that stigma saying, "Oh, they've been married before," and I think that's significantly higher in the Asian community than it is in the wider population. But I think once you've got children, yeah, that stigma does increase, and it is still there.
And do you think that comes down to the kind of the cultural importance and significance in South Asian communities of the um, two parent family unit, the kind of reverence around marriage and that being the
Mm.
definition of success and unity? Is that why it's so kind of prominent in the South Asian community?
It probably is. It probably is where it's still that and I think whether we look at it even in the general wider population, it still is. Yeah, you know, a two-parent family is still looked at as the ideal scenario, and I think within South Asian families, and I think more particularly those who still hold more traditional values, even though I come from a very traditional family. But however, I think it's the individual and their own level of, if we say, emotional intelligence, in that how they view it is, if you view it in that, look, it happens. Two people get together, you get married, things don't sometimes work out, and unfortunately, it's not the ideal scenario, but it does happen, and it's how you yourself deal with it. And if you
Mm-hmm.
let let's say, I think some people will let the stigmas hold them back, whereas I haven't. It was very early on. I was like, no, I need to sort of face society, and I'll face it. And I
Mm-hmm.
used to, I could, there was evidently individuals who, didn't want to communicate because of it, but it was about sort of not backing off yourself, saying, well, you know what, it's happened, but I'm not going to let it affect me or my children. And so yeah, and I do think, yeah, there's that whole sort of concept, isn't there, that those who are more traditional have more traditional views, and I think they're the ones who still will push their children, even if they know their children are unhappy, they'll still say, no, you stay there. You don't, end this. And I mean, I still hear of scenarios nowadays where people are in unhappy marriages because they've got no support around them to say,
Mm-hmm.
look, this isn't working. Yeah, you need to come out of it. Some people, I think, still forced to stay in their unhappy situations, which
Yeah.
is not ideal. But that still happened. That's still evident.
Yeah. So I guess what would you hope to see around the perception of fatherhood changing in the South Asian community and society as a whole?
Um, I think from having been through the process myself, I think it could be one where, from a legal perspective, things were done in a different manner. Because when you look at the whole legality that sits behind divorce, etc. I mean, it's decades old. I mean, it's a very old law that we still follow in this country. And obviously, since then, society, everything has moved on significantly, but the law hasn't changed. So I think that would be worth looking at in terms of, yeah, how do these things happen? They shouldn't be so. I mean, it's a traumatic time no matter what. And I think the legal system could make it significantly less traumatic for both sides. And so I think that would help. And I think I think in terms of society, what I've seen personally, and I've seen this evidently, and I can sort of I've seen it on several occasions, is where when you've got a family unit, and even taking in the wider family, if in that family divorce has happened at some point or separation, very quickly that family can go from having very traditional set views to literally changing within a space of a couple of years because they've experienced it. And I think it's the whole thing of when you've had to live with it, you learn to experience it and you learn to accept it. Because they say, don't they, unless you lived something, you really don't know the impact of it. And I think
Hmm.
those families who've experienced it, they accept it, they respect it, that it is unfortunately a thing that does happen. And so they lose their previous biases or prejudices against certain individuals because of that. But you've still got some families where they luckily haven't had to experience it. But I think now because it is unfortunately so common, so prevalent, that there aren't many family structures that haven't had some level of experience where two people are no longer together.
Yeah, I think it is becoming more common for single parents to exist.
Yeah, yeah,
And I think
definitely.
people are more confident in having the autonomy to separate themselves from
Yeah,
unhealthy marriages and relationships. So it is good that that confidence and the acceptance of it is growing,
yeah.
but not quite enough, uh,
No, not quite enough.
really.
It's like I still there are situations I've come across where people find it weird that me and my ex-wife we get along. If we're ever at, let's say we're at a function where a family of my family still communicate with my ex-wife and I'll never stop them. So she may get invited somewhere, and so people look there and think, oh, she's here, they're here, and they find it bizarre when we can talk or we're like laughing or something.
Hmm.
And I think they still find that hard to think, well, they're divorced. But it's like, yeah, we don't have to be each other's enemies, and but I can see you can sometimes see out of society looking and thinking, that's that's a weird picture.
Yeah. I mean, it's great that you guys have found this middle ground that you're able to interact with each other and co-parent healthily. Um,
Mm,
what advice would you give to perhaps two parents who are going through a divorce and they want to reach that harmonious, peaceful, healthy stage of not being together but
yeah,
co-parenting and having a good support system together for their kids?
yeah.
Other than having a good support network, what advice would you give to them in how to speak to each other, how to interact with each other, how to build that safe space?
Yeah. I think initially is if if they're separated, then I think it would be great if they could sit together, just the two of them, no one else, and talk and share their feelings. Not about okay, the separation, the divorce has happened. It's like now what? If particularly if they've got children. Obviously, if they've got no children, then there's no need to stay in communication. But if you've got children, it's okay. How do we make this as best as possible work for our children? And that's that. If you can, between the two of you, come to some mutual agreement or arrangement, and it won't be perfect because, like anything, nothing works straight away. It'll be up and down, but is to keep that communication open and sort of
Hmm.
say to each other, look, we'll get it wrong sometimes, but we've got to bear with each other.
Hmm.
And sometimes it will work, but bit by bit you'll get to a point, but you've both got to want it. Both
Yeah.
individuals have to. And that's where I think you have to step away from others, step away from those. toxic people, step away from people saying, well, no, you should do this or do that. No. If you can, two of you, or if you then have, let's say, you may have a mutual person that you both respect. That could be a family member, that could be a friend, a relative. Is see if that person can help, you know, that engagement or that communication. But it's got to be somebody that you both agree with. But yeah,
Yeah.
I think what
Like a
what should
mediator.
happen? Yeah, a
Yeah.
mediator, but a mediator that you both know and trust.
Hmm. Yeah.
I think that's the crucial thing. If like we didn't, we just had each other, and eventually we got there. But if someone has someone that can help, then why not utilize them? Or
Hmm.
someone who's been through it themselves and has a good relationship with their ex, because that person will come with a lot of experience of, okay, it doesn't just happen overnight, but they can probably offer the best advice to somebody who's going through it, of saying, look, I want us to have this, can you advise us? And that person would probably be the best person to give that advice.
Yeah. No, that's right. In terms of your journey as a parent, because I can imagine you're always learning, being a
Yeah,
parent. Um, on your journey of fatherhood, aside from the difficult stage of the divorce, what have been the main other challenges that you have experienced and faced as a single dad?
I think the one challenge is just to make sure that you are part of your children's, their lives as they're growing up. To make sure you're still playing the dad role, you're doing it effectively. Because with my boys now, they're at an age where they're both adults, but it's still trying to ensure that I'm part of their life, that I'm checking in, because they're at that age now, they want to lead their own lives, do their own thing, and it's just sort of making sure that you do still make sure that they understand that dad's here, and that can be challenging, particularly when you're not under the same roof. So that's one. I think the second is, as a parent, as a single parent, I think this is both probably from whether you're male or female, is then probably moving on into a new relationship. I think that can be challenging in that it's. I think it's much easier to move into a new relationship where there aren't children involved. But when you do have children, I think it just makes it slightly more challenging to, move on in that aspect. And that's from both
Mm.
sides, male and female.
Do you have an experience of that? Are you happy to speak about that? I mean, did you
I,
find a new relationship, and what was it
yeah,
like
I,
bringing that person into the family dynamic?
yeah. That's. I was going to say, yeah. That's. So I've been looking that I've, met some wonderful individuals. Single at the moment, but I've met some wonderful individuals who, we've had very positive relationships. But for one reason or another, just like any normal relationship, they got to say they didn't work out, but they were great, and we are still, you know, good friends. But that's where, yeah, I think because you've got children, they're a family, and I think it's just making sure that you're aware. And this is sort of a learning. It's been a learning process for myself, in that you've got to put yourself in your relationship first sometimes, and not the family, because external, again, individuals, they always have their own, let's say, people always want what's good for you, but as long as it's good for them and it's on their terms. And so I think with when you're starting off a new relationship, it's much more challenging. Um, Not in everyone's case. I know some people have it much more straightforward into moving into a new relationship. And to be fair, my boys have been excellent. They've never been an issue. They've been very sort of, yeah, dad, meet someone, move on. But it's probably been the wider family acceptance. But that's where I think you've got to learn to become. And the experience has taught me you've got to become more selfish and say, no, I'm going to do what's good for me, not what's good for everyone else around me. Because you can end up trying to please too many people, and
Well,
that's
yeah,
been sort of
yeah.
Yeah, that's been something that I've learned through experience,
Hmm.
where you try and think, okay, I want this, but I want others, because not everyone will always be happy for you, and that's where you've got to be felt selfish and say, well, actually, I know what's best for me, and you need to sort of stick with that, even if it, isn't everyone's cup of tea. But you need to do
Yeah.
what's right for you. I think as long as your kids are happy with it, that's great.
It's the same as like airplanes saying put your mask on first before you turn to help someone
Yeah,
else put their mask on,
yeah.
because you're no good if you're
No,
flat on the floor
exactly. Yeah,
struggling. You need to be happy and stable and healthy yourself
yeah,
before you this light. You have to be happy, stable, and healthy for yourself before you can provide that for somebody else. So I think that's completely fair to say.
yeah.
In terms of support groups, networks, podcasts, um, things out there that are there to support single dads, is there anything that supported your journey and your growth that you would recommend to other listeners?
I not really. No, I don't think I sort of just sort of I learned as I went along. Um, and it's like everyone around me, most of my friends, are in relationships, they're married, etc. So it was it's like just me and sort of, okay, I'm in this situation now. You just sort of learn as you go along, and I think everyone's journey is different, and you've got to
Mm-hmm.
sort of live it that way. So yeah, so there was no sort of support group or anything that I turned to. I did. I mean, I remember I initially tried some counselling when it first happened, when it was sort of quite traumatic. Did it help? I don't think it did a great deal, um, but I did give it a go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think I'm a massive supporter of therapy in general. I think everybody in the world, even if you've had barely any problems, can
yeah.
do with therapy. And I think it's about finding the right person.
I was going to say it's the
And it's
right
hard.
person.
Hmm.
Yeah, it
It's
is,
really
because I
hard to
think
do.
I think this is it where people who like counselors, it's much more general for them, whereas you need much more specific. So if there was, say a South Asian person who'd been something similar, I think the one thing that would be useful is, I think that would be really useful, and I think this is probably same for females as well who go through this, is if there were more specific, let's say South Asian, let's say support groups or counsellors, because unfortunately, like I said, I had a few sessions and I got them through my work because my work provided them. It was someone who's Caucasian, and their understanding of Asian culture was just, it unfortunately just wasn't there. And so, and it does, so it sort of, and it's not their fault, they just don't know what they don't know. So if there was more
Hmm.
of that, I think it'd be really useful.
Yeah. I mean, on that note, for any single dads who are listening, there are a few podcasts that we would recommend. There's Dads Unlimited and there's Both Parents Matter. We're going to link those in our caption for this episode, as well as some other resources that you may find helpful, useful, enlightening. So be sure to check those out. Sukhy, thank you so much for joining today. It was wonderful to hear your journey and how you've overcome the struggles that you've gone through in the divorce and the marriage falling apart, but being able to find that harmonious co-parenting system, which many don't achieve. So it's a huge achievement for you guys. I think many will be inspired and comforted by that fact alone.
Oh, thank you for having me on. It was, hope it's been given some insight, and hopefully it helps some others down the line. Because it's not an easy journey. So hopefully it can, offer some support or guidance to somebody.
No, absolutely. Well, that's it for today's episode of Single and Strong. A huge thank you to Sukhy again for sharing his powerful journey with us. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. And don't forget to share it with anyone who might benefit from these stories. Until next time, keep challenging the norms and breaking the stereotypes. Goodbye.